All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. So this is actually kind of a replay of a session that we had done before. I have my fabulous associate Siobhan with us today. We're doing the dynamic duo of project management and change management, team up for excellence. And we did this session. It was actually almost exactly a year ago because it was April 2016.
Yeah.
And so we thought we'd do a replay of it because we're actually launching into a dynamic duo series. And so if you look at our regular end of month ones, but we thought let's start providing some for some of our West Coast clients. So just some logistics today. Myself, Dave, is going to be the host. We've got Jessica Burney helping us out on the technical side. So if you have any issues or anything, fire Jessica a note or just pop into the chat window and she'll be monitoring that for us. From a sound and technology perspective, if you're having any issues there, just give it a few moments because sometimes at the beginning the sound and the video is a little bit out of sync. It usually works itself out. And we are recording these so that if you want to catch that later. And if you do have any issues, feel free to raise your hand. There's a little icon there at the top. There's also the chat box that will be there throughout, and you can pop in any questions or comments or thoughts along the way. And of course, as always, we accept applause. Okay, so I'm just going to formally introduce my associate here, Siobhan. She's our change management um, director, I guess is program director. There's the word. Sorry, it's been one of those days. So she's our resident change management expert. And as you can see, Siobhan has lots of letters after her name. She has studied this very, very in depth. And, we're just so happy to have her on the team and helping us out today. So we're going to start off with a quick poll. And the question is very simply, what percentage of change initiatives succeed? So when we talk in terms of change initiatives, be that a project or, if we label it as a change initiative, what is the percentage of them that actually come to a successful conclusion? So I'm going to get you to just pop in and go ahead and vote on that. Let's give it a couple more moments. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got here. It's kind of an interesting mix. We've got a little bit of a pessimistic crowd today saying only 30% succeed, but 20% saying about 55% of them succeed, and then we've got 40% saying 70% succeed. So we've got our expert in the room, so what I want to do is turn it back over to our expert here, and Siobhan, what do you think of those results?
Well, it's pretty grim if you look at it. It's all over the place. But the reality is, there was a lot of research that was done on this, and we've got John Cotter who wrote his book Leading Change back in 1996. And what he found after interviewing about 400 different organizations to see how they were dealing with change is that only 30% of them were successful. So that's a really small number, actually, if you think
It's a
about
very
that.
small number.
In fact, 70% are failing. And there is a lot to be said about that. So that means when you're launching your projects, your change initiatives, there's a very small percentage of them that are actually successful. So we got to take a look at, well, why is that happening? And is that never even real? And they
Mm-hmm.
actually did some subsequent studies back in 2012. He redid the study again and found that that never really actually hadn't changed. It
Wow.
still sort of remains at about that 30% range of successful projects. And then IBM did another study and Watson did another study, and they still came in around between 25 to 28%. So that number of 30% is pretty substantiated that there's not that many projects that are successful in terms of
Wow.
implementation.
I always thought anecdotally that there's a lot of projects that are challenged and some outright failing, but I never thought it was quite that bad. So hopefully we'll be able to look at some of the reasons why and tell us a little bit about the 7 obstacles.
So, Prosy did some research in terms of what are some of the challenges that are causing these projects not to succeed. And as you can see here, not getting enough change sponsorship from your senior leaders. So, you may have executives that are not on board with the change, they see it, but they're not really fully participating in it visibly, and you're not getting the sponsorship that you need to proactively remove those barriers and get the resources that are needed. And then you can see here that resistance from the employees as well as resistance from middle management are both really huge in terms of impacting whether or not a project is going to be successful. If you don't have your middle management, which is probably the key to those change management projects being successful, if they're not on board, then chances are the employees aren't going to be on board either. Because if my direct leader or supervisor is telling me that this sucks, I don't want to be part of it. So you've got that resistance coming from both prongs. So you've got your middle management, your frontline, as well as senior management. If they're not all on board, this is doomed to fail. You've also got insufficient change management resources. So we're looking at situations where team members are not getting enough, whether it's time, money, assistance to get this project off the ground. And so that, of course, causes another set of strain. You also have poor project management, which is why we're talking here today. Mm-hmm. So not enough time planning. People want to just jump into the doing and not really take the time to plan, especially when it comes from a risk perspective, which you probably already know that, yeah. And I'm sure many of those that are on the webinar today know that too. Then you've got ineffective communication. So whether it is you're communicating not enough or you're communicating, but it's not really landing well with your staff. So you've got a bunch of issues that are going there with the communications. And as Cotter had said, people get accused of over communicating. For the most of the time, it's under communication, and that's causing a huge problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And the last one you'll see here is the culture is resistant to change. So while you may have this fantastic project, you plan it really well, you execute it, you do everything you're supposed to do, and then 3-6 months later, you just see people going back to the old behavior, or they're not really fully accepting it because it's not ingrained with the culture of the organization. So Peter Drucker talks about culture eats strategy for breakfast. So in that case, you got a great project, but if your culture's not wanting to accept it, it's done.
Absolutely. And some fantastic points here. As you were just going through this, I was reflecting on some of my project experiences. And I know from that first bullet point, one of my favorite success stories, we had amazing sponsorship and support from senior management to the point where we actually had titled officers, the CFO of the bank, phoning people directly, to kind of enforce that, and what a difference it made. And then we think about the resistance from employees and resistance from middle management. If they're not accepting and that, it's going to shut it down so quickly. So let's take a look at what we can do around that project management piece.
Okay.
Well, first of all, let's understand a little bit better about what change management is, because I think a lot of people, there's a misconception that change management is just communication, and if I communicate, I'm doing change management. So what's more to it than that?
Right. So there is a lot more than just communication, but that is a major aspect of it. So when we look at change management as a whole, it's a dynamic process that leverages 4 key things. The first one is being communication, but it's got to be strategic 2-way communication, not just 1-way communication. So we typically communicate via email. I find most of the times we send out messages to people about a new project or a new initiative. We send them out an email, effective June. This new project will be underway, but that's not sufficient because 1, you're not getting any feedback or any reaction from anybody else because it's just a 1-way type of communication point, and 2, it's not even enough communication just one time that you're letting somebody know. So we'll talk about the first aspect, not having 2-way. So you need to make people feel like they're involved in the process. So this is why we want to have a 2-way type of communication: the one-on-one meetings, the team meetings, the town halls. Any form where people can provide their feedback, that's where we're talking about 2-way communication. Now, the second aspect of this is you want to make sure that you're communicating with them often and in many ways, which kind of ties into the second point around engagement activities to create awareness for the change. So you want to create this communication to be multiple times over. So we're looking at between 7 to 15 times is how many times you need to communicate a major transformational change. And while for some of you who are listening to this right now are like 7 to 15 times, it seems like a lot of times. Like, really, I'm working on a small change and do I have to communicate that many times? Well, not so much for the small changes, but for the transformational changes. So these are changes you'd be working on for about 6 months, maybe 18 months plus. Those are the types of changes you're going to want to communicate 7 to 15 times. Because if not, what happens is people take those mini vacations.
Right.
So, they take a vacation, they come back to the one email that was sent, they're shuffling through the hundreds of emails that they received while they were on vacation. this one email that talks about this project that you're launching. They're like, yeah, okay, I'll get back to that. They put in their FYI, but as you and I really know, you never have time to go back to the FYI, so that just doesn't get read. And now they're back in the environment. People are talking, hey, did you know about this project? Like, what project? What are you talking about? I didn't know anything about this.
And I guess it also helps bring it back to top of mind, because if you've communicated it to me, 6 months ago, and now we're into the next stage, I've forgotten about it.
Absolutely. And so you have to be repeating this message multiple times over. The other thing too is there is the figurative mini-vacation. So the minute I say mini-vacation, and as some of you are already doing this on this webinar right now, you're thinking, oh, this weather's really awful. I want a vacation myself. I woke up to snow this morning and what I was looking for, or, it's really cold or whatnot. I want a vacation. Maybe I'd like to go to the Bahamas, or I'd like to go to some tropical place that's nice and warm. And, I went to Cancun and that was pretty fun too, but the food actually wasn't so good. Speaking about food, I need to go to do groceries afterwards.
Okay, we're going to bring you back from Cancun here,
but Siobhan. This is what happens. So people take these little mini vacations and then their brains all of a sudden has gone off on a tangent somewhere, and they're planning next week's work or who they need to meet up with after work. And they've completely disengaged from what you're talking about in terms of the project. And then they come back to reality, but they're like, oh, what did I just miss? And so you have to repeat these things multiple times over for it to actually stick. And then you want to use multiple different formats. So this is where you may have focus groups, or you may have a World Cafe, or you may have open space technology, videos, your conferences, you send out a broadcast, what do you call it? A broadcast, telephone recording, or whatever. So just multiple different ways. Even the old school desk drop. That's so powerful because people don't see that very much in the use of paper. So you don't have to use a paper, but you can put maybe a little trinket or a chocolate, and then it has a little note that's attached to it, something that's related to your project. It gets people's attention. That's really what the engagement activities is about, getting people's attention, making them feel involved. Then we have ensuring readiness, which is really around training and support, coaching and mentoring, so that people are ready to take on the change, because they're now going to be feeling all these different levels of anxiety. I'm scared, I'm feeling nervous, will I be able to do this? And so we need to reduce that nervousness by giving them the tools. And then lastly, looking at instilling confidence through empowerment. So encouraging people to take those risks, go out, try the change, see how it's working for you, and then giving them praise and recognition along the way so that they're moving towards that future end state.
Beautiful. Love it. So just some things that I was thinking about as you were talking, and so many people come to me in my world and say, how do we increase that buy-in? And the thing that I've been telling people is don't worry about buy-in so much, worry about joining, get people participating. So hence the two-way communications, the engagement activities, get them doing that. And when you're saying about 7 to 15 times of communication, it seems like a lot, but if we think about it, what you're saying is very true, because we often have communications that don't land. So maybe I do 7 of them, and maybe 2 of them land, and okay, now the message got across.
But you also have competing priorities too.
Absolutely.
So every time you turn around and you're working on a project, then here we go, squirrel. There's the next project, right? And then it gets their attention, goes elsewhere, and so then this person's like, okay, where am I supposed to? What's my priority? And the more yours is front of mind, the more that they'll be putting effort in that direction.
Guilty is charged on that one, definitely, and especially love your multiple creative ways of getting there. So what can we do about this? As we saw, one of the 7 obstacles is poor project management. We do a lot of work with Untitled Shift around project management, and want to just put this into a context of how we manage our projects and how we can not only leverage change management to make our projects better, but also how can we leverage projects to make our changes better. And we're going to look at this in the classic 5 areas: initiating, planning, executing, closing, which is your typical 4 high-level phases of a project, with monitor and control layered on top of that. So what we'll do is we'll dig into each of these in detail. And for initiating on the project side, it's all about defining the why, the problem, need, or opportunity that we're trying to address. And how we go about doing that is we identify our stakeholders. Our stakeholders help define the business need, which is really the why behind this, and this justifies the project's existence. So, Siobhan, what can we do on the change management side to do a better job of the initiating of the project?
Well, first of all, we need to understand the need. So similar to where we're defining the why, on the change management side, it's really around understanding, again, why are we doing this, and how's this related to the strategic objectives of the organization? And people need to really understand that why in order for them to accept it. Oftentimes we just jump in and we tell people, this is what we're doing, just do it because I told you to.
Mm.
Well, that's not enough. People need to really get the full context and understand it. Then we start moving into the sense of urgency, which means we need to do something about this now, not later. And Cotter talks about that as part of his first steps of his 8 steps to leading change is you need to create a sense of urgency. So to build that up, people got to be a little bit disgruntled with the status quo and feel like the benefits that they will materialize are going to be more than the cost of actually going in and taking on this training. And then we also need to take a look at, is the organization even ready to take this on right now? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the capabilities? Do we have the resources? Do we have the skills to take this on? Do we even know what we're doing in terms of the knowledge area? So we need to do a scan of the organization to see, can we take this change on at this particular time?
And are people ready to receive it? Because there's
exactly.
that whole emotional piece.
Exactly. So from an individual level, too, we need to check to see, are they ready for this change?
Beautiful. Yeah, so really kind of aligning it with the needs. And I love that you put it in the context of strategic objectives, because we so often get married down in the details. We forget about that larger piece. And you're absolutely right. If there's not that sense of urgency, if we don't need it now, it's like we'll take care of it later. And of course, later never comes.
Right.
Absolutely. So walk us through a little bit about what is the kind of the process or methodology of how we would go about doing this, or what are the pieces involved?
So with change management, really what you're trying to do is move from where you are right now to where you want to be. But then there's 4 key elements that we need to consider. So first and foremost is the context. Why is this happening? Why are we doing this? And I think both of us can agree from both a project management standpoint and from change management, we need to understand the full context and description as to why we're doing it. Then we start moving into, well, what are the things that could potentially get in the way? Those would be the barriers. So we need to list off what are the challenges and come up with a plan to be able to mitigate some of those situations. We also factor in the process. How are we going to get there? What's involved in terms of the steps? And then the people, which is who's going to be impacted by the change, who's interested in the change, and who's leading the change. So when we look at all of those areas, actually what we could throw out a question to the group is, which do you find to be the most challenging when you're looking at those 4, the context, the barriers, the process, the people? What do you find to be the most challenging thing? So if you want, can you type your responses into the box?
So pop it in the chat box on the right side there and put in your where you feel are the most challenges. I'll even add mine in.
All right, let's see what people have to say.
So while everyone's typing, I find, oh, no, look at that, everyone's agreeing with me.
Yeah, everyone's saying the people almost unanimously.
I'm kind of between the people and the process, and that I think the process for me, it's and that might just be my own personal experience, because I find sometimes we get too focused on the process, or then we tend to go to the other extreme where we don't do enough process to support it. So we get that whole, we have that good intention, but we don't have the process to support it. So
what I hear from most people is the people, because they're like the wild card. Yeah. Are they going to be on board with the change? Or are they going to resist the change? What do I have to say to them as they're going through the different emotions of the change? And it's just a lot of work to deal with the people aspect. But then for some, it will be the process, which is how we're going to do this. Especially if you're venturing in a change that you've never taken on before, then the process gets tricky because it's this uncharted territory. Yeah. Exactly. So it helps if we can look back at some of the lessons learned to help us in terms of the process and what we can leverage. And then, of course, we'll go through this and we're going to learn and have some pain points along the way.
Sharon actually just raised a very interesting point. Zone leaders may not agree with provincial leaders.
And that may be true. And so that adds another layer of both the people factor and a potential barrier for you. So depending on what the change project is. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get people onto the same page and to buy in to the change itself and to commit. But we got to figure out what are their issues. So we'll probably have to do a little bit more talking around in terms of the barriers, the what, and uncover what are those challenges and then address them, or at least show them where they're both in alignment and have them focus on those aspects as we move forward.
Yeah. In my experience, I find when we have that disconnect with different levels of leadership, it's often we haven't well defined the the why, and we don't have a really good clear picture there, and hence the why often leads to the resources So, and of course, everyone's dealing with their challenges and what their focuses are.
Yeah, sure. And I totally agree. I see your comment here. They want more money for
Hmm.
resources, and there is no money. I think that's not even typical just for the provincial leaders. This is like right across the board with many organizations. Usually the resources is the huge issue, not having enough money, but wanting to take on a lot of initiatives. And so that's another one of those barriers that tends to prevent things from moving forward. But is it an absolute consideration that we need to factor in?
Beautiful. So let's move into planning. So we've talked a little bit about initiating. From a planning perspective, from project management's perspective, this is really defining the what and the how. So now that we've figured out why we're doing the project, what the problem, need, or opportunity is, what's the solution that's going to get us to that end state? And it's about getting into the details. Now, when we get down to those detailed levels, especially for longer term projects, we can't do the details all the way out. So we get into rolling wave. We're gonna plan in detail this segment, and then do the next segment, and then do the next segment, and so on. And now we're really getting into balancing those priorities. So to build on what Sharon was saying around the having the resources, and we get into the whole balancing of delivering within a timeline, within a budget, and all these kind of factors. So it gets very low level into the details. How can change management help us out with some of this?
Well, when we look at in terms of planning, we want to make sure that we're creating a vision, and not just a vision, but a shared vision. And it's really important that it's shared so that people feel that they're part of the process, and so that they were involved and it wasn't something that was like forced or pushed on them. So getting people together, and even if everybody can't participate, at least have some representation. So you can say things like, we heard from you based on your feedback. Your peers have said. Anything like along those lines makes people feel that, okay, well, I didn't get my personal say, but somebody who knows what I do did have their say.
Right.
So this wasn't created in isolation, or the senior leaders didn't just have a little meeting one off and then decided this was the new thing to do based on a course they may have taken. It's new flavor of the month. This is like, we talked about this, and it's a shared vision that the whole organization feels that this is the direction that we should go. Then you want to start looking at building a change team. Cotter refers to it as a guiding coalition, but you want to make sure this team is powerful. So they've got to be really smart, they're well respected, highly influential. And they're the ones strategically you're going to have throughout the organization that's going to go out, get the information, tell people what's happening, find out if there's any concerns, bring it back to the change team. So they're going to be working back and forth between the respective departments as well as the change team. And then you want to be starting to build momentum, which is creating that excitement for the change program. Lots of communication, awareness activities, telling people, we need to change right now. And once you've got a huge portion of the organization on board, then we start building enough of that critical mass, so to speak, that this change is happening and it's moving, whether you want to jump on it or not. And then we also need to factor in the different reactions that people will have to change, and then how do we respond appropriately to that?
Absolutely. I love that you use the term a powerful team when you talked about building that change team. And there's lots of places where we can find that power, whether that's positional because they've got titles, or where they are in the organization. But really, I think getting those folks in that are really influential, the ones that have that power that transcends the title. The ones who are really kind of people are looking to for direction. And the other thing I really love what you said was around having that representation. So even though I may not get what I need, or actually more appropriately what I want, having my voice being heard and knowing that I'm part of that, at whatever level, I think is really going to go a long way. Now, you mentioned about reactions to change. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So initially, when a change is announced, you're going to get various reactions. So very similar to the distribution curve. If you remember when we were back in high school, we had those professors to tell you, like, okay, some of you guys will get A's in my class, and some of you are going to get F's in my class, and the majority of you will get B's and C's, and somewhere in the middle. And he felt that if the change or the course he was offering, the test, if it was hard enough, that would be the distribution that we get. I mean, quite frankly, me, I was never concerned with the B's and the C's or the fails. I wanted the A in that class, right?
Of course.
But when you relate that back to change and reactions to change, they sort of follow this distribution curve very similarly, according to Rogers. So you've got about 16% right off the bat who are going to naturally be supportive. They're going to think that this is a fantastic idea. It's a great opportunity. They want to jump on board with this, and they're going to do everything they possibly can to support the change. Then on the extreme opposite end, you've got about 16%, and they think this idea sucks. They don't know what the executives were smoking. This is just absolutely awful, and they're very vocal about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the group in the middle. It's about like 68%, and they're neutral. So they're just kind of on the fence, and they're sitting there like, all right, just convince me one way or another. How should I go about this? Should I jump on board or not? And so that's kind of how it sort of distributes in that way.
Okay. So where should we spend the bulk of our time? I'm going to pose this question to the team. And let's bring up our poll here. Good, I got the right one. Open that. So I want you to vote. Where do you think you should spend the bulk of your time? Now, I'm going to emphasize the word bulk because we're not suggesting that you're going to only address one of the three. What we're looking for is, the majority of your time and energy and effort, where are you going to put that? So go ahead and vote. Give it a couple more moments. Okay, let's end the poll here. And this is actually kind of seems intuitive results. We got 50% saying resistors, 33% saying neutral, and 16% saying in supporters.
Interesting.
So it is interesting. Now, it seems to me that when I ask this question, most people are saying we need to spend the bulk of our time on the resistors and win them over. So what are your thoughts on that, Siobhan?
So we've got multiple different preferences here in terms of where people think they should be spending the bulk of their time. But let's go through this actually in opposite order. So we'll start off with the supporters first.
Okay.
So the supporters, a lot of people think we should spend the most amount of time with them because if they're on board, then we can get the neutrals on board.
And we don't want to lose them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't want to lose them. We want to keep them engaged and we want to keep them happy. But the reality is, they're already on board, so we don't need to spend as much time with them. So for those of you who did say supporters, I understand where you're coming from. So from a strategic point of view, what you want to do with the supporters is you want to make sure that you're keeping them happy. You're giving them the tools that they need in order to explain the change back to their team members respectively. You want to make sure that they can anticipate what people are going to say and be able to have a response to that.
Right.
You want to engage them and make them feel that they're valued and important.
So in a way, you're supporting your supporters.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So you want to have you might even consider things like giving them a title, like a special change agent 007, right? Like I know that sounds silly, but people who are attracted to that type of role or being a supporter, they like that kind of stuff. It makes them feel important. They're all involved. And so we really want to engage them. That's the main thing with the supporters. Give them active involvement in the change and give them some autonomy to sort of make some decisions so that they feel like they are really leading it and part of it.
Okay.
Then you've got the neutrals, and that's actually where you should be spending the bulk of your time, to be perfectly honest. 68% of the group is in the neutral group, and if we can get the majority of that group over to be supporters, we will hit what they call critical mass, and that's where you hit about 70% to 75% of them. And so that's really our goal. With the neutrals, there's lots of strategies that we want to use with them to convince them to come over. We want to look at explaining to them what is the change, why do we need to change right now, and reinforcing that message multiple times over, 7 to 15 times, using multiple ways, 7 different mediums. We want to make sure that we're being empathetic because they're going to be experiencing a range of emotions and they want to feel that people actually care about them. So we want to make sure that we're taking that time to explain what's happening. We also want to make sure that not only are we communicating the change effort, but we're encouraging them to try out some things and recognizing them for that behavior. But more importantly, explaining to them, why are we asking you to do this in the first place? So that people can really wrap their head around the context of the change. And if we can relate it in terms of the benefits, why should I do this? And not in terms of just it's great for the organization or it's great for the team, but really what's important for me, then people are really going to grasp onto that and want to jump on board. And then we've got the resistors. Right, so I know many of us thought we should spend the bulk of our time with this group. So I want to know, what do you think you should do with the resistors in that case?
So let's pop into our next question on that. We actually have it. There we are. And question 2.
So how should we deal with our resistors?
All right, so just pop into the chat box there and answer this question. How should we deal with the resistors? we go. I'll get you all started. Multiple people typing in this point. I always love seeing that. Okay, so how are you dealing with resistors? And you can do this from both the standpoint of what you think is the right thing to do, and also, from your experience. How have you dealt with resistors in the past?
So I see some really great examples. Like I know we always want to fire them because they're just they can be such a pain, like they complain and complain and they take all this energy. And we find that we spend the bulk of our time with those that are complaining the most. It's kind of like that squeaky wheel analogy, the more that it's squeaking, the more we want to silence it. So, but really what we need to do is actually just listen to them. Let's hear what they have to say and then we'll take it from there. So once we hear out what their concerns are and what their issues, we want to bring that back to the rest of the change team and sort of talk through what are some ways that we can address what are their issues. So kind of what Ian was saying, find out why are they resisting in the first place. So they can have multiple concerns. And if we can address those concerns in a public format that shows people that we are truly listening and valuing the feedback that we get, not only are we dealing with the resistors, but we're also converting a lot of the neutrals over because they're hearing that we are listening to what people have to say. And those that are highly influential and very powerful resistors that tend to be the ones that are very vocal, that people respect, that starts to reduce their power when we talk about it in a public format. So if we said, hey, David, he has brought to our attention a couple of issues that are concerning him with regards to this new initiative that we're taking on, and we appreciate everybody's comments, but in particular he had a couple of areas, say for instance that he felt that the technology was not up to par and that security was an issue and that we were overloaded with tons of work and we can't possibly finish all of this. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to be bringing in IT and we're contracting with another organization to ensure that security is of paramount importance. We're making sure all customers' information and data is going to be securely transferred. We're going to make sure that IT has what they need in order to be successful with this project. And we recognize that many of you are feeling overloaded and anxious with a lot of work. So we're going to help you by reassigning what the priorities are. So these will be our focused initiatives based on the objectives of the organization, or we'll be bringing in some additional help temporarily to offset some of this workload. But by saying this vocally, whatever it is the solution is, we are now showing people that we care about them, that we're hearing what they have to say, and then we're integrating the feedback in the change.
And you're really kind of demonstrating that support on a very public forum.
Yes.
Right? So now it becomes a question of, well, my suggestions aren't barriers so much as they're now actually enabling you to make the project even better and address those concerns. And by doing that in a very public forum, it can show how this can move forward.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And by doing that, it helps people see that, you're not just it's not just self-interest for you to get the project out. You really do want them to participate, which helps to increase their buy-in.
Excellent. Thank you. So just, thinking about some of those things that were said, getting that whole critical mass, right? Now we've got that movement, and it's now to the point where I'm no longer being the holdout. I'm now actually, the bus is leaving, and if I don't get on, right? Now there are some people you can't change, and I think this is, when we talk about that squeaky wheel analogy, we can't do everyone. We can't convert everyone, but if we can get enough, and what was that number again? 75%?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, so once we get about 75-80% of the organization on board, most of the rest are going to join in, and those ones who are really going to be those super strong holdouts, at the end of the day, it is their decision. The other piece that I really like, and as a lifelong trainer, WIIFM, what's in it for me? Really thinking in terms of how this impacts the individuals and how we can help them kind of see where it's going to be for their benefit. So we've talked a little bit about initiating and planning. Let's take a look at executing. And in simple terms, this is work the plan. So we figured out what we're going to do. We're now rolling up our sleeves and getting the work done. We're getting those change requests coming in. So we're going down that road. Our plan was this. It was kind of that nice straight path, but then there's deviations along the way, dealing with the issues and all that sort of thing. It seems like there's a lot of kind of ad hoc change as opposed to plan change at that point. So how can we use change management to help us in this regard?
Well, we want to strategically plan out for some short-term wins, and short-term wins meaning points within the project that we know
Hmm.
we're going to be achieving things. So they could be your milestones, but they could also be key things that we just that are working for the project. But every time we mention it, not only are we advertising the project itself and what was working really well, we're creating excitement.
Hmm.
We're getting people to see, hey, we're doing something about this. It's moving in the right direction. And for the non-believers or those that were still in the denial stage, they can see, oh, okay, they're actually serious. They are moving this thing
Yep.
forward. And we want to also encourage experimentation. So we want people to start demonstrating those desired behaviors, the skills, try the new process, use the new system. So we want to increase the risk taking at this point, but also be able to temper that with proper feedback and then give them recognition and celebrating those successes along the way.
Beautiful. So this is really explaining why on my projects, when I would do those small celebrations partway through, they were
Yeah.
so well received, and doing things like a sandbox where people had a safe place to go and try and experiment before things went live. Because I know I would often get a lot of resistance to, or not a lot of resistance, but a lot of trepidation when people are like going to use the new system because
Yeah.
they're afraid of making a mistake, and we give them the sandbox to play, and they can make the mistakes, and then learn from that.
So
So yeah.
well, this is like a typical change model in terms of what happens when people start with the execution. So, and this is actually adapted from William Bridges. In the first section, you'll see is the denial. And so most people will go through this like, what? No way. I can't believe they're actually going to do this, like this whole shock kind of thing. And then they start going into like some anger and frustration, which then looks like resistance. And at this point is where we really want to make sure that we're reinforcing the messaging and that we're also demonstrating that empathy for people. And you can't push them too fast from resistance to acceptance because if you do, then they'll actually hang down a little bit longer in terms of
Mm.
their depression.
Get entrenched
And
almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we want to make sure that we're spending enough time with people to hear what they have to say. So when there's an ending, what we're looking at is honoring the past. So we're taking a moment to reflect on all the wonderful things that worked in the past and then why we have now decided to change and do something different in the future. So we want to, it's kind of like a mock funeral almost, right? So you
Mm.
take a moment to reflect on and celebrate all the wonderful work that we did in the past. And for people who worked on things for like maybe 20 years, and then you're saying, hey, this is not working for us anymore. We want to be moving over to the New World Order. Of
Yeah.
course, they're going to be upset. And that's where the resistance starts digging
It,
in.
it, it can almost be a little bit of thumbing your nose at them because like they've been doing this for 20 years, and while it was good, we've got something better, right? So we want to make sure that we're honoring the past as well as creating that going forward.
Exactly. And if we can get some of those people who are working on the past project to be part of the new system, even better, because
Mm.
we can leverage that expertise.
Yep.
And as we start slowly moving towards the acceptance, this is where things become a little bit chaotic because people are trying things, they're not necessarily getting the right results they're looking for. You notice how performance is still a bit low between the resistance and the acceptance right at the bottom there. But the more they try it, the more results that they start to see, the better performing, then they start saying, oh, okay, this is working now. So their performance starts to slowly go
Mm-hmm.
up. And then we start moving into the commitment area where this is New World Order. So to make sure that it sticks, we have to start looking at system alignment, structure, strategy, policies, procedures, and the culture. Make sure they're all aligned with the change so that people can't revert back to that
Right.
old behavior.
So providing that support to enable them to keep going forward.
Absolutely, because
Beautiful.
if we don't, they will go back to
Yeah.
the old behavior.
Seen
People are a
that.
little sneaky and
Seen
they
that a
try
few
to go
times.
back, but they can't
Yeah.
do that.
And I guess that acceptance too, that curve going up, there's a bit of the learning curve happening there because I'm accepting it now. I got to figure out how to make it work.
Right.
I love what you said right at the beginning is you can't push people too fast. And I think from a project management perspective, we're already through this curve. And we're often, months, if not years into the project. And now it's just starting to be announced or becoming real for some of our end users, some of our people, our acceptors who are going to be receiving this product deliverable. So I think we need to, really be cognizant of the fact of where they are on the curve as opposed to where we are and giving them time to kind of catch up. So a little bit of a shift gears here. We're going to shift into monitoring and control. So while we're doing all of this initiating, planning, executing, we're keeping an eye on how things are going, watching, and making adjustments, fixing. So when we talk in terms of monitoring, control, and project management, it's always about watch what's going on, take corrective action. So how can change management help us with this?
Well, similarly, we want to watch what people are doing and
Mm-hmm.
how they're reacting to the change and then know, well, what things do we need to do and when should we be intervening if it's not working the way that we had intended it to. So we factor in another change curve. So if we go back to the same change curve as we were talking about before, then we want to layer that on with the different reactions. So because what we're noticing is that people are taking such a long time to get from happy mode, like get it on board with this, and they're just resisting. And so I want to ask, well, why is that happening?
Right.
What's taking them so long to move from resistor to the supporter? What are some of the things that are getting in the way? So I'm going to throw that question out to our audience here. What do you think some of the things are happening that's causing people to resist far too long? And it's taking them a lot longer to get them from resistor to supporter.
Okay, so in the bottom area there, just type in your thoughts on why it takes so long for people to change.
Yeah,
Ooh, some good ones there. Yeah.
So we got fear of job security, which is absolutely right, because oftentimes when people are going through change, they don't know, am I going to keep my job? Am I going to be able to meet the expectations of this new role? Will I be able to get it? And what happens if I don't? So there's a lot of fear, and same with the fear of the unknown. If I don't know what the new world order is exactly supposed to look like, there's some nervousness and anxiety that's associated with that. That term's actually called learner anxiety, and it's a very natural state, and we need to be able to anticipate it. And that's why it's so important to offer that training and that support so that people's anxiety levels can start to reduce and that they feel like I can make it through to the other end. And as Ian has mentioned here too, culture is also a really big problem, because if the culture is not jumping on board with the change, then it's going to stifle it. So if you have a lot of people in your organization that are very much stuck in the past or the old ways of doing things, they're not going to want to move forward as quickly. So that's why it's so important to honor the past and take moments to reflect on it before you can push people towards this new beginnings. And when they have to learn a new skill from one place to another, I think as Sharon was talking about here, that's also a lot of anxiety is associated with that, and which goes back to the whole fear of the job security and not knowing, am I going to learn what I need to?
Excellent points. Just as we're kind of going through this section here, I love that you said around watching what people are doing, like when we talk about looking for the reactions, because I think in the world of project management, we sometimes get too focused on the numbers. Like, are we on time? Are we on budget? But meanwhile, we're not kind of stepping back and looking at kind of where they're at from that perspective. And then the other piece of the learner anxiety, because I know it can be very, especially for people who have been in their jobs for a long time, there can be a huge amount of anxiety around, am I even able to learn? I mean, we're always told that, you learn as a kid, but you can't, learn as an adult kind of thing, which we fortunately know is not true anymore.
Yes.
You can learn as an adult, and it does take some energy and time and effort. And I know that there is a bit of a performance dip as we're in the learning curve, and then of course, our performance kind of comes back up. So enabling people to kind of move through that and helping them managing that. So when we think about paying attention to how what people are doing and how they're reacting, what about the emotions piece?
Well, from the emotional side, people are going to feel a range of emotions, from extreme happiness to anger and frustration. And generally at the very beginning, they go through the phases of anxiety and then a denial, which kind of looks like shocking and even blaming, because they're starting to point fingers like, well, this is your fault, and why did you make this happen, and you're ruining my life, right? So Kubler-Ross did a lot of research in terms of how people handle death and found it was very similar to how people handle change, surprisingly. So right off the front, it's the whole shock and the denial, and then they start moving into the anger, where they want to start pointing fingers and blaming management for coming up with this dumb idea. And really what they're doing is they're masking the emotion of vulnerability. They're scared. They don't know what's going to happen next. So instead of admitting I'm scared, they'll just say, this is dumb. And so then they go into the bargaining mode, and bargaining kind of looks like, I'll show you, we don't need to do this. Maybe if we just stay the way that we are, then we can still get the results. So sometimes what you see, it's really funny, there's actually like a performance spike. And then when they realize that it's not going to work out, then their performance drops back down again. So then they go into full-on resistance at this point. And then sometimes people go down to the bottom where it's like depression. And so I was referring to before, if you push someone too far, then they can get stuck in that depression. If you start hammering them with all these
Right.
benefits, this is a problem. So, with my grandfather, he had lived to be 100 years old. And at his funeral, people would say things to me like, "Oh, Siobhan, you should have known that he wasn't going to live forever, and like he was 100 years old. You should have expected this or planned for this, and you can now he's in a better place and all this stuff." And while I can intellectually take this
Mm.
all in, I'm not trying to hear that right now because I'm upset and I'm grieving. And so we need to allow people that time to actually vent and grieve. And similarly, when they're working on projects that are no longer there, and because we're moving into a new form, new order, new system, we got to give them a moment to deal with that. Some people told my grandmother, "Oh, now you've got all this free time, and now you can do things that you want to do, and you don't have to cook for him or take him to appointments." Okay, so that might be well and true as in terms of a
Yeah.
benefit, but she's not there yet.
Yeah.
She's still upset and grieving for her husband of over 50 years. So while people are well intentioned, and same what we do in the work environment, well intentioned to explain what all the great benefits are, they're not everybody's ready to be there yet. So we need to give them a moment just to sort of deal with what the reality is, and then when slow and be empathetic towards that, and then slowly move them over to, okay, let's try this out. And even saying things as simple as "I'm sorry for your loss" can
Mm.
be very real for people even when they're dealing with change, because they may lose their friends if
Mm-hmm.
it's a structural type of a change, or they may lose access to resources or systems or processes. So and everybody's going to take it in a different way. And so as we start moving them towards the acceptance, now they're trying things out, they're seeing the new world order and how it's working, and they start exploring. So this is a great stage where they're at. And so we want to encourage them to continue with that. And then they start moving over into the commitment where things are going really well. This is the new state. We're aligning it with the systems and structures. Everything's sort of coming together and cementing in the change.
Fantastic. I love that you put this in a juxtaposition of emotions versus intellectual, because so often we go, well, the numbers are here and it makes sense and it's logical, but we do have to deal with that emotional
Mm-hmm.
piece and the whole, how people go through this, because it is a loss, right?
Yeah,
And whether we're losing the old system, we're losing the old way of being, even when the new system is far better, we're still, we like the old way. We've been doing it that way for,
exactly.
10, 15 years, whatever. And we do have to go through that grieving process. So allowing people to do that, and then just as I mentioned earlier, when we looked at the first version of this curve before we layered the second piece on, um, you often need to give people time around that because we've had a chance to go through that ourselves. So let's bring this into closing as we approach the end of our hour. From the project perspective, it's very much about the transition of the deliverables, very much about getting the thing, whatever that was we were building, whether that's a new system or a new software or a new building, and transitioning it to the users. And then it's about the lessons learned and how do we do and how can we do better. So what can we do around change management to help with those?
Well, here we want to look at aligning the systems and the structures. So it's like a lot of policies and procedures and things in place to make sure that it's going to stick. Otherwise, people we're going to revert back to that old behavior, and it's counteractive because we took all this time to plan for
Mm.
the change, we implement it, but we didn't shut off the old system, so to speak. So you got two running in tandem. So what do you think people are going to do? Of course, they're going to go
Go
back
back
and
to the
use
old
the
one.
old one. Even if I
Yeah.
was complaining about it, how much I thought it sucked, I still want to use it because I'm comfortable with that. I'm
Hmm.
used to that. So we have to make sure that that access is cut off. They can't do it anymore. If we were going to introduce a performance management system, and wanted everybody to be all collaborative and we're reinforcing teamwork, but we have a compensation structure that is giving people financial rewards for operating independently, people are going to demonstrate that self-serving action. So we've got to make sure that if we're going to implement something, this policies and procedures and the systems are in place are going to support that change.
Hmm.
And then we also want to make sure that it's fully integrated into the culture. So we want to consider that piece perhaps even up front so that people are knowing that when we're going to go out and look at implementing a new project, a new procedure, a new system, whatever that might be, that the culture is going to support this right
Hmm.
from the get go. And then when we are in the ending state, we're looking at, you see, this is in alignment with where we always said we were going to go. So just reinforcing that.
Fantastic. So, aligning the systems and the structures so that, we've got that there. And I often use the analogy of the New Year's resolution because, we have the good intent, but we don't have the
Mm-hmm.
systems and structures to, sort of carry that forward. So I think some really good stuff there. Um, always been a big fan around cutting off the old system because in my experience, you run two systems side by side, and what happens? They always go back to the old one.
Yeah,
And like you say, no matter how bad it was and how much they complain, it's comfortable, it's familiar.
exactly.
So we got to help people kind of transition on. So thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
Just to leave a couple points to remember, you've got to support the individuals here. Yes, we do want to look at this from a larger strategic perspective, but if the individuals aren't there, it is going to fall apart. We need to create sustainable projects. We need to create sustainable ways of going forward, because if we keep delivering only 30%, while that's a good batting average on baseball, it doesn't make for good business. And I think, for me anyways, looking at the whole change management and project management, I'm definitely seeing some things that I was doing intuitively there, just didn't really realize it, and fill in some of those gaps. I think we can really see how good effective change management can really, really help out and turn us into superstars when it comes to managing our projects. We are at the end of our hour. We've got about 54 minutes. There's just a couple minutes left. We'll leave it open for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop into the chat box and type those in. We'll monitor those for the next couple minutes. There's your PDU code for those of you who are claiming PDUs, and our contact info if you want to contact either of us for following up. So thanks again for your time today, Siobhan.
You're welcome.
We'll leave it open for a minute or so for any questions. Just pop them into the chat window there. And otherwise, we'll sign off, and we'll see you next time. Jess will follow up with you with an email for the next webinar, and hopefully we'll be able to see you then.